We are recording on Tuesday, September 30th, 2025 at 9:02 a.m. Eastern Time with Dr. Richard Kradin to talk about, among other things, the mental illness aspect of going quote unquote woke. And I just a couple days ago my YouTube channel was reinstated after being banned for 1,490 days, 4 years and 1 month for not promoting violence, not for pornography, not for anything, for interviewing Dr. McCullough and Dr. Malone right as the vaccines were kind of rolling out. And
Wow.
even they have since become far more staunch and like don't take it. At the time though, they were pretty vanilla. They're like, yeah, if you're older, you might want to take it. If you're younger, probably not. And that's what got me zapped. So, Dr. Creighton, please introduce yourself, sir.
Well, again, I'm trained as a pulmonologist. I worked at Mass General Hospital in Boston for over 40 years. I'm also trained as a psychoanalyst, so I have a kind of broad perspective on mental health and physical disease. I also have an interest in comparative religion. I have a postdoctorate degree in that. So it all comes together in my book, but hopefully we can integrate some of it into this conversation.
I always have to ask, did you read House of God?
I did.
Yeah. I I graduated the University of Georgia in 2013 and I was accepted to University of Miami Medical School. And my buddy was 1 year ahead of me. Same high school, same college, and he got into Miami too. So it was kind of like these two carbon copies. And he was like, before you go, he's like, you have to read this book, House of God by Samuel Shem. I
Yeah.
was like, all right, I loved organic. I was a weirdo. I'm like, I loved organic chemistry. I aced the MCAT. Now, ultimately, I was having kind of my own cold feet about med school and ultimately decided not to go. That book absolutely 100% helped push me over the edge where I was like, this is insane. And I believe it's Mass General, right? It's best medical school, right? But it's supposed to be Harvard and Mass General. I always have to
I
ask.
I think he was actually at the Beth Israel, but I think it's about Mass General. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's kind of what it was like.
And he had another one. I think it was Mount Misery, and I didn't finish that one. It wasn't as good. But it was about becoming a psychiatrist.
Uh,
And kind of the same thing where it was just like equally he was like I don't even know what this is. But in terms of, applying mental illness to the term woke, like I'm a more conservative leaning guy. People that watch this podcast know that. But my I guess problem with the whole kind of confirming everyone's, you know, gender isn't that I, don't think you I'm very, live and let live. You do you. The problem I have is so when I was 23 years old, my 27-year-old brother committed suicide. That was about 11, 12 years ago. 11. And I don't, I might make fun of it, but I don't care if you dye your hair pink or, you say you're Zims or I don't, ultimately I'm like, no, I don't care. You do you. My problem is that when people transition, when they physically have their penis removed or
mhm.
have a epidermal penis attached and they take all these hormones and the suicide rate it surpasses that of like war in Iraq veterans. And that's my issue with it. Not that if you want to identify as a fox, like I'll make fun of it, but yeah, you do you. Ultimately, you do you, man. My problem is as somebody who's lost someone incredibly close to me, my older brother, I I'm not okay with people patting people, especially children, on the back to something that statistically, what it's about there's a little under 50% chance you're going to commit suicide.
Yeah.
That's my issue with it. You can take that in any direction you want, but that's kind of where I
Okay,
come.
I'm going to take you back a step
Sure.
because I think it's very American and very Western, I guess, at this point, to say, well, I'm okay with what anybody does, behind closed doors.
Sure.
Uh, Perhaps that's in part where the error is. Uh,
I I would say I'm slowly warming up to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think we've accepted some things that probably never should have been accepted. And the medical profession and the psychiatric profession has assisted in that, if you will. Uh, but I think the society requires a certain consensual set of rules that we all need to agree upon. And we need to agree upon them with respect to whether or not they promote the welfare of society and help society flourish or detract from it. I don't think we actually apply that type of standard anymore. It was kind of common back in the ancient world, but it's not common anymore. So, accepting that what homosexuals do behind closed doors, what transsexuals do behind closed doors, what this and that does behind closed doors, it doesn't stay behind closed doors. It seeps into the society. And after it seeps in and becomes accepted, it insists on being celebrated. And I think that's what we've seen in the LGBTQ, whatever,
Hmm.
uh, movement. It started out with an acceptance of homosexual activity, well and good, but then it's spread out into what we're seeing today. And so again, I think if you give certain groups, particularly those groups that are based on a grudge, if you give them a finger, they'll take your hand, and if you give them the hand, they'll take your palm. And I think that's what we're seeing today in society. So I would say what really needed to be done, and maybe it's too late because the cat's out of the bag now, but some of this needed to be nipped in the bud early on.
Realistic.
That's a very conservative statement.
No, dude, you're
Um,
fine. I've done so many interviews. I don't, you say whatever you want, man. Um, yeah, no, I'd say early on, I kind of had that view where I was like, hey, man, you do you, I do me. Again, it's harder for me to have that mindset now when ultimately it does bleed out. And then it's okay, let's play devil's advocate. Well, then what does it matter if it bleeds out? If it bleeds out and if a song becomes popular, it's because people liked it. You may think it's bad, but it's just popular. Okay. Again, I come back to it leads to a massive amount of people killing themselves. Just call it, don't even call it suicide. Killing themselves.
yeah.
And then
Well,
another big aspect is where does it disproportionately get applied to? It gets applied to children. So those are two things where it's like, hey man, it's not that this leaked out and it's something like bell bottoms or like the mullet, where it's like, yeah, we'll forget that one day. It's leading to suicide and it's preying on children. That's that's not something that's just staying behind closed doors.
the transgender community, uh, going back now, maybe let's say 20 years, it was widely accepted amongst the psychiatric community at that time that these were individuals suffering from severe mental illness. Okay. They had what you might term, or we might term, an encapsulated psychosis. Okay. Psychosis is the most severe form of mental illness. And it's based on two criteria. It's either an abnormality in thought, what we call delusions, or an abnormality in perception, which is hallucinations. Either of those put you in that category. So if someone thinks that they are a woman when they actually are a man, that's a delusion, or at least that was widely accepted as a delusion. Using the philosophy of the Enlightenment. Okay. I have to get to this because what we're suffering from now is not just capitalism versus neo-Marxism, conservatives versus woke. It's a difference in philosophies. The Enlightenment philosophy was the basis of science as we have it today. It insisted that it was possible through observation to come to some understanding of truth. Postmodernism, which is closely linked to Marxist thought, uh, has come to the conclusion that there is no truth, that there's only what subjectively individuals believe themselves to be or believe things are. So you see that, amongst many of the young people today. It's like, if I think I'm this, I'm that. That's not objective truth. And science doesn't work with that form of truth. It only works with the type of truth that's based on empiric observation. So what's happened is the medical field, as well as the psychiatric field, has rid itself of the criteria of science, which is what it's based on, and now adopted this postmodern idea that basically anything one believes to be true is subjectively okay. So you have, moral relativism, you have subjective ideas about, what one's identity is. And this is all permeated both society and the professions, all of the professions. Uh, but it's not okay for a profession that claims to be based on science. It's not okay for medical science. And so when they talk about, well, we're following the science on the left, well, they're not following anything even close to the science. They no longer regard science as a definitive thing. So, I mean, I think people need to be aware of that. It becomes a problem. It becomes a problem because if you're going to designate a set of rules via which to diagnose disease, mental disease, or physical disease, you have to have some agreement. Uh, so if you're dealing with two different ideas about what reality is, you can't make a diagnosis anymore. You can't say that something is aberrant. What's aberrant to you and me is no longer aberrant to other people who have a completely different concept of reality. So there's a deep issue here. And it's why it makes it virtually impossible to have a conversation with the left at this point or with the woke. I don't think it's ever going to be possible until they rid themselves of this mindset to have that conversation. So then what you're left with is a situation of a bad divorce. You know. What do you do when you have two people who can't agree on anything, which you see all the time in bad marriages? Uh, so they have to get divorced. And sometimes even divorce is not enough. Basically, you need to eliminate the power of one side. Uh, and that's, I think, what's going to happen here. This is a struggle for life and death in society between the conservative mindset, which is the traditional mindset about a whole variety of things, and the woke postmodern neo-Marxist view of what reality is supposed to be. They cannot coexist.
Well, that's pretty definitive. So logically, you'd have to, walk it up the path of, I don't know, just progression. What does that realistically look like? Is it a social pressure to say this is a mental illness, or is it rolled out legally? You can't do this anymore.
Well, it was always considered a serious mental illness. And again, these individuals not only had abnormal ideas about their sexuality, but they had severe anxiety, they had paranoid ideation, they had borderline personalities. Again, I'm using traditional diagnostic criteria. They were severely mentally ill. And they weren't, it was very difficult to treat them in any, meaningful way. I mean, it's not a good disorder to have. Um, what do you do? I think for the sake of society, for the sake of the mental health and the future of our children, and even the mental health and the physical well-being of these transgender people, as you say, because they are prone to suicide, and changing their identity through surgical interventions or hormonal interventions isn't going to change that in any substantial way for the vast majority. Uh, so we're not doing them any favor by colluding with this disorder. We have to accept that there are some people who are disabled in life. There are some people who are born with cerebral palsy. Some people have one limb. Some people have cancer. Some people have transgender mental disorder. Uh, These are the unfortunate people in society. You do the best to support them, and that's about it. I don't know that there's any cure for them or anything that's really going to really make their life a whole lot better. But that's just the way it is and always has been. And, imagining some rosy future for them isn't going to change things.
I guess I'm looking at it as like, because I don't even disagree with anything you're saying, but it has to be, it's like when, I don't know, it's just when people go, America shouldn't be the world police. All right. And then you see instances where America is not the world police, and you go, okay, well, maybe some American power is good. That's something where like you and I can talk about it, and then we can put it down, and it
Mhm.
disappears.
Yep.
Someone somewhere is in the Pentagon. Someone somewhere is commanding an aircraft carrier strike group or a Delta Force kill team or something. Someone somewhere has to make or like, okay, what are we doing? Are we gonna protect global shipping lanes or not? Someone has, right? Truman, the buck stops here. So with everything you're saying, I'm looking at it as like, where does this go then? Because you and I can agree on it, and that doesn't really mean anything. But if we say like this has to stop, what does that realistically mean? Where's the teeth on that? Where someone has to go, are we all agreeing it's stopped? Is it now illegal? Is it now illegal in the same way it's illegal to drink and drive or to not pay taxes or to, light a bonfire in a residential neighborhood or something?
One of the biggest problems I think we have in American society is the rights that we're so used to, get in the way in many respects, because, we think again that everybody has the right to their own opinion, and who are we to suggest that their opinions are wrong? But the fact of the matter is, going back 20, 30, 40 years ago, I think we generally, as a population, could all agree on certain basic things. I don't think we can do that anymore, which means the rules at some level have to change. Uh, yes, I think this mindset needs to be purged in some way. I think it needs to be purged, hopefully through the courts, although I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen based on the legal system that we have. I think Trump has made some efforts along these lines to purge this mindset out of government. And again, it's probably the right answer, but he's going to run into all types of legal issues as he attempts to do it. Uh, I think there has to be some mode of culpability, some mode of responsibility, some penalty for people who hold views, who hold power in certain areas, that they need to be taken out of those positions. And again, I think we're seeing some of that occur, but it needs to occur in a much more vigorous form. And people are going to need to be much tougher about it and much less accepting of, the difference of views that some people have.
And again, I don't. This is just kind of what I habitually do on the podcast is play devil's advocate because there's nothing beneficial to anybody listening if we both just agree with each other and pat each other on the back. It's like what's the point of this? Um, but yeah, it's kind of like I don't know, like 2016 Trump, we're gonna build the wall versus people in 2024, right? When just the number of times these, illegal immigrants are arrested and then let go, 20, 25, 30 felonies. And
Yep.
then it eventually comes to, they stab someone or they rape some kid.
Mhm.
And and then that's covered up or that's, the government does their best to say it wasn't. Then that's where you get where we are now. And I'm like the first couple days of the Trump administration, I'm looking at like the Twitter of like some of the special forces guys I know. Because you'd have people that were, okay, this has to stop. You have to shut down the border and you have to remove these people. And then you'd start having, videos of ICE grabbing people and arresting them. You'd have people who voted for Trump, conservative people being like, well, I don't know about this. And the military guys would say, make up your mind, and then you have to have the stomach for it. It doesn't mean
Yep.
that you're not going to see sad images, but you have to have you reached a point where you go, too many innocent people. I mean, where I went to school, University of Georgia, where I used to park, the intramural fields. That's where I think last year, maybe the year before, um, that chick was raped and murdered by an illegal immigrant. Places where I've probably walked before. So you do have to reach a point where you go, okay, you're sealing the border and you're removing all of them. And there's going to be unpopular media. There's going to be people screaming and crying. And you're
Yeah.
allowed to feel for that. But you also have to make your decision. Like when I 2020 when I put my dog down, he was 17. I probably should have put him down a couple years prior. Eventually you have to go, this sucks and I know I'm going to be sad, but the animal's suffering. So, and I'm not trying to call people animals, but I think that's kind of where we're approaching is you
Well,
have
well,
to
the,
decide does it are you going to put in legitimate effort and go, yeah, and it's going to be a bumpy road, but in the grand scheme of things, the negatives far outweigh the positives.
well, in order to do that, I mean, obviously I agree with that wholeheartedly. But in order to do that, you have to have a strong moral compass.
Sure.
You have to have some clarity about what you believe in. And unfortunately, I think this country, the people in this country have become soft, both physically and mentally. I don't think they have that strong set of moral guidelines that they had, half a century ago. And as a result, they're ambivalent about most things. As soon as they see something that causes them, a modest degree of discomfort, they back off. And I think the left understands that about people and has used that against them. In fact, they've co-opted a lot of the ideas of social justice from traditional religion, and they've used it to shame people who don't have a clear idea about what social justice really is meant to be. And so that's why you have all these people feeling guilty about what's going on with minorities and women and transgenders and the like. When if they had a clearer idea about, what things were meant to be, I think they could make decisions and have more of a stomach for the unpleasantness that is going to have to take place as a result of trying to put this country back on track.
Um, and just to again play the inverse to that. So I think we've already seen some of it. I think the first big one or the first mate or whatever was uh Hegseth saying, you can't be in the military. Eventually, so if it hits a point to where, do we agree that you can't do these? Because you'll never be able to stop someone in the privacy of their own mind saying I'm a woman, right? That's philosophical. That's consciousness.
Right.
Um, but if you hit a point where you have the stomach to go, okay, we are what does it look like? Is it these surgeries are no longer legal in the United States? Like somewhere it has to hit like the legal law, well, the
Yeah.
legal wall, excuse me, of you can't do this, or hormone therapy that is illegal. Um, where does that eventually look like?
Well, I don't think that's that difficult. I mean, if you can't buy a pack of cigarettes in this country till you're
Sure,
about 25, or you can't drink till you're 18,
21.
uh, is it 21 now? Great.
Yeah,
Uh, then I think you can certainly pass laws that say you can't have gender-affirming surgeries till
sure,
you're 21.
sure.
Uh, and even then, I think after perhaps undergoing a substantial psychiatric interview and evaluation. So yeah, I mean things like that are possible, and things like that should occur. I mean, absolutely should occur. It's a travesty what's occurred in the medical profession, and it's a travesty what's occurred in the psychiatric profession. I've written two other books, one on each of those topics, and they're both good reads. Because I was witness to the transformation of these professions, and it's nightmarish in a way, and it's a strange mix of neo-capitalism, of just plain old greed, and a strange ideology, and in some ways they're contradictory to each other, but somehow they manage to coexist in the minds of some of these professionals. No, something needs to be done about those professions. And this all the professions, legal profession as well. I mean, they've all been transformed by neo-Marxist postmodern ideology.
Logically, we would then have to play this out. And years down the road, how is this not turned against, like anything, the Patriot Act or whatever? It's eventually no longer in the hands of the people who passed it when they were in office. It's in the hands of the next people, and you may not like the next people. If there's a legal precedent, where does this eventually go? And just to play it out in worst case scenarios, how could this eventually be used to target me? If we can deem one thing, and again, for the record, I agree with everything you're saying in this podcast, but for the sake of a good interview, where does this, or how can it be eventually turned? At what point do we say this is mental illness? At what point, I mean, is it too absurd to say in 30 years, if you get some other kind of crazy wave of wokeness, at what point is nationalism? Somebody
Yeah.
like me that loves the United States, at what point is that a mental illness? Because if the precedent's set, could you not unroll that or roll that out in ways that are not good?
Absolutely. And if a woke administration returns to power, that's exactly what will happen. It definitely will happen again. So I think it's incumbent upon us to try to get the message out as clearly as possible to the most number of people out there that this cannot happen again. That, the Democratic Party, as we saw it in the last 4 years, can't come back into power.
But if it does,
If it does, we're in trouble.
so that's kind of where I come down on it is like it's not so much that I disagree with that this is an illness and that we can't, enable it, so much as I look at it as like I'd rather have it enable as it is, I'd rather have it enabled so that the counter cannot be used against me. And eventually,
I think the question is how you're going to fight the Civil War.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean that's where that's spoiler alert. That's where it eventually goes. Is how much
Well,
ammunition and water do you have?
yeah, I mean, this is a civil war.
Yeah,
There's no question of it. It's an undeclared, cold civil war. But nonetheless, that is what it is, and it's going to come down to questions of who exerts the maximum power, as it does in all wars. So, if we can exert that power in a peaceful way, well and good. If we can't do it that way, I don't think there's going to be a lot of options.
no, I don't think you're wrong. Yeah, that's kind of another way to look at it. Is like we came pretty close in the last 4 years, specifically last summer, to it spiraling down the drain pretty much irreversibly. Another opinion would be to say it's kind of a game of musical chairs, and the right ended up in power right now, and it's either you put an end to it or they will put an end to you. And it's a sad outcome, but it is the outcome, and it does us no good to pretend it's not where we are. Um,
Well, I
this
think that's what people do. I think we're all in some type of illusion that's it's just too unpleasant to contemplate. And it is very unpleasant, understandably. But if you follow things, I think logically, if you look at what's been going on empirically, it's hard to avoid that that's the end point.
It really is, and I think it's one my own conscious and subconscious desires to want to live in this world where we go, hey, agree to disagree. And I think it's also influenced by looking back at old debates between Kennedy and Nixon or whoever, and you always see this just level of like manners of like, hey, I don't think he's a bad guy. We disagree on how the country should be run. And I think and this is a flaw of my own, I romantically want that to still be the case of where I agree to disagree. Um, I don't think that's where we are. I don't think we're talking about, effective tax rates or, the drinking age or, Medicare. It doesn't seem like we're talking about that. It seems like we're talking about outright censorship of anyone that disagrees and the complete promotion of bringing toddlers to strip clubs where men in thongs wave their genitalia around and the parents cheer it on. That's no longer an agreement or a disagreement on what the Navy's budget should be. That's a
I know,
fundamental
but
human thing.
it is, but it's also a distraction. Uh, it's a serious distraction. It's one that, we need to attend to, but it's ultimately a distraction. I think if you study history, or if you speak to people who have lived in Marxist, socialist, communist societies, they recognize what's going on. This is not the conversation between reasonable individuals. We're dealing with a Bolshevik style mindset, uh, whose only concern is promoting their own power and eliminating people who object to their ideology. So I don't think you can apply the usual conservative rules to a revolutionary Bolshevik style group of people. Now, that may not be your neighbor down the hall. He's just usually a useful idiot.
Yeah.
But there are people behind the scenes, and there are probably countries behind the scenes that have put this into action over the last 50, 60 years. I remember the 1960s. I'm not old. And I was a college student and a liberal college student, like most were. I've come a long way in terms of my ideology, uh, but I saw the roots of this, and I know that what happened on the streets in the 1960s, late 60s, actually then transmuted into the institutions of the country, particularly into academia and into the teachers' unions. So that revolutionary style mindset uh, took a different path. And the path was, we're not going to riot out on the streets anymore, but we're going to go into the institutions and we're going to raise the children and we're going to transform their mindset. And before people even realize what's going on, we will have transformed the country into a neo-Marxist haven. And so that's what's been taking place. I think people are just beginning to wake up to the possibility of that. When I first started writing on this topic, 5, 10 years ago now, uh, I had a very different mindset about it. I was thinking about things more in terms of psychology and differences of opinion, difference of, personality styles. And increasingly, I've come to realize that this is, again, a neo-Marxist movement that's attempting to transform society in a very specific direction. And the business of woke and the business of using the Islamists or even the sexual pieces, they're all part of it. But again, they're meant to distract you from what's really taking place. And so again, I'm not sure that we can get ourselves out of the unfortunate realization that we're dealing in a war.
I think the only kind of upside you can have is say we've acknowledged it now. It seems like it can still be, it's going to be unpopular with a lot of people, but it seems to be that there is the political capital right now for people to say, we're no longer doing X, Y, and Z. And you can hate it and you can go on the news and say Pete Hegseth's a Nazi or you can say whatever you want,
Right.
but we are at a point where it hasn't gone over the edge yet. And we can prevent it from going over the edge. The cost is going to be you're going to be called a Nazi racist, which is, I mean, how many times have I been called that per day for a decade? Like, all right, fine. Um, the flip side is if we don't do this, it will slide. It's going to keep, there's no rational reason why the last 4 years would not resume the second Trump is out of office.
Yeah.
It's not that the second he's, I guarantee you, I'll be right off YouTube. I'll be kicked right the second, Twitter's deemed a monopoly and they break it up, but they don't break up Meta. We saw what they were willing to do over the last for just outright. And I was somebody that was saying, "Hey, man, these are private companies, even though they're banned." And that's not even the case now. When you look at all the FBI, the DHS had all these back doors into them. It's like, well, that's not even a private company anymore. So we saw pretty clearly what not only what their plan is, but what they're willing to do. This wasn't pearl clutching and this is what the Marxists will do. No, no, we can look at factual instances and not 80 years ago, 2 years ago. We
Yeah,
can look at it.
yeah,
It's
no, they're willing to do anything. You know, they will take you off YouTube, and if they can, they'll put you in a gulag, and if necessary, they'll put an end to you entirely. I mean, I think that's the mindset. So I think you need to approach it like that's the mindset. So this is an existential crisis for the country and for the people who still believe the country is worth fighting for.
no, it objectively is. There's a reason why they're willing to do a long march through the institutions. They don't do this for some backwater nation with no power. They're doing this because this is the bulwark against global totalitarianism. Just is. You don't have to like America. It is. It's just that's what it is. And yeah, you gotta have a sober examination of where we are. And you also have to look back. Like I love reading about the Cold War. You always look back and you're like, yeah, McCarthy was right, and he probably didn't go far enough. You can't hold that thought and then at the same time say that we can't take the gloves off now. Like we we know he was right. In hindsight, we go, no, that's exactly they were pointing it out. You have to do that, and it doesn't make you a bad person or a bad society to understand what the threats are. It's not just a nuclear tipped ballistic missile. It's also, Yuri Bezmenov, active measures. We know what it is, demoralization, hyperrealization, tragedy, conflict, resolution. We know what this is.
Yeah.
And just because we have this ideal of like, but this is America where you're allowed to do whatever you want. Like, I get it, and it's a beautiful ideal to aspire to. I also have an ideal of myself and my daily progress that I aspire to. The workout, how good the show's gonna be, how many views it's gonna get. I never get it. I try to get as close as I can. And I think that's what it is, well, if we start banning them and censoring them, then we're no better than them. Sure, but they've already shown you what their move is. They
Yeah,
will do this to you.
well, again, I'm old enough to remember, how people viewed communism in this country. It was very negative, and you couldn't hold office in this country if you were part of the Communist Party.
Yeah.
And we didn't do business with the Soviet Union. So, I mean, why can we not apply the same mindset to what's going on here today? Maybe people who hold communist ideas shouldn't be allowed to be in Congress. Uh, you know,
Not only are you allowed to do that because we've done it before, you're also just allowed to do it because it's where we are.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, not everything. Well, what were they doing in the 50s? Be like, yeah, well, it's different. There's a new mode of attack. In the 50s, they weren't slicing off their genitals. It's a new thing. It's a new attack. 9/11's like, oh, okay, they're not coming over in, columns of tanks. It's hijacking a plane. The war changes. That's the other thing is you also don't need a reason. You can just look at this and go, yeah, this has to stop immediately. I
yeah.
don't care what the precedent is. Stop it. End it.
Well, it would be very helpful if the majority of the Supreme Court took that mindset with respect to the welfare of the country and stop diddling about issues that probably are very minor in the big picture. The other thing I think that really has to be addressed, and conservatives have been very poor on this, that is the educational system in this country. Because, we've lost at least one or two generations, I think, to this type of thought. Uh, and unless you can get into the public schools and clean them up, you're going to have kids who are brainwashed and indoctrinated into this woke mindset, and it's going to be very difficult to do anything in a political way as long as they have this indoctrination.
So it does seem you and I are both in agreement about all of this. Is there, just for shits and giggles, for the, the elasticity of our minds and as a thought exercise. Is there a gray area? I'm not saying that's the answer, but in addition to, okay, these surgeries are now illegal. Okay, you can't just go to the pharmacy and ask for, Oxycontin. Like that's illegal. It's also, and I think it's a positive part of our society, is we also don't say, all right, now up against the wall, we're going to shoot you. We have rehabs, we have private and public, and sure they differ in value, but we don't outright say, not only can you not go buy Oxycontin at the gas station, but there is, hey, do you need help? And there's, be it Narcotics Anonymous or rehabs or outright being admitted to the hospital, going through opiate withdrawal or alcohol withdrawal, which everyone knows can kill you. Is there something in addition to where, that the hammer is no more, you can't do these surgeries, you can't do these hormone therapies. Okay. Is there something on the back end though where you go, and here's where you can go if you're having. So if we do treat it like mental illness, there must be a level, again, ideally, there must be a level of care for them. In the same way, you look at somebody who's a paranoid schizophrenic, you don't go, that idiot, you go, man, that, you know, God bless, that sucks. Like, where can they go?
There are two issues, I think. One is the at the level of the personal, at the level of the person. The other is at the level of society. Um, First of all, you have to be clear in your mind that the transgender issue is a mental illness. You can't have any doubt about it.
Sure.
Um, and I think too many people, again, I mean, unfortunately, the majority of people are like sheep, you know? I mean, they just are. And they get their cues from social media, they get their cues from their neighbors. They want to be liked, they want to fit in, they don't want to stand out. And so, they'll go with the flow wherever the flow is going. So that's always an issue. Uh, as I said, I think for the transgender group, it's a severe mental illness, and I'm not sure there's a lot that we really have to offer them. We can offer them supportive therapy. Uh, we can make them as comfortable as possible, but they've got a problem that's not going to yield very, very readily to any intervention. So the next level is, okay, that's what we've tried to do for the person compassionately. What do we now do for society? And I'm an Old Testament sort of guy. And I think it's important to recognize this country, even though it was founded by Christians, was founded really based on the Old Testament in
Hmm.
many respects. And the Old Testament's clear about one thing. It says, you have to take the evil that's amongst you and remove it. And I think you need to be aware that certain people need to be kind of just isolated, if you will, from society for the benefit of society. So that fellow who down in North Carolina who killed that young woman on that train, he's clearly mentally ill. Uh, but, you know, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, we had mental institutions where you could put people like that and, they would stay there. They would stay there until they were well enough to re-enter society, if ever. And if they couldn't, they just stayed there. We need places like that. The left has done away with them again in their grand design, not to make everybody equal, but to disrupt society. Because mentally ill people out on the streets, homeless, mentally ill people, are not capable of integrating into society. And so we have an obligation to society as individuals, not just to the individual. And this is where the judges who make these awful rulings, they should be impeached. They should be removed from the bench because their role is not just to show compassion to the individual in front of them. Their role is in part to protect society, and they're not doing it. And that's a major role for a judge. So I think those two ideas need to be held in some, kind of equanimous balance in people's minds. You need to consider the individual, you need to consider the society, and they both need to be considered at the same time.
So that's actually what I was gonna bring up, and it's something I know very little about. I was born in 1990, but it does seem like asylums need to be a thing because, I mean, ultimately, and I know this is more starry-eyed, but I mean, we are, you are your brother's keeper. I don't think that the idea of an asylum is, I would much rather that than say you're not allowed to do this, and if you do, we're just going to shoot you. Some things that applies to pedophilia, but other things, if someone's truly, I mean, mentally ill, truly not, mentally ill, I think I think we absolutely have to bring asylums back, and I guess this is where I'll sound more like a lefty, but I mean, if we can do $1 trillion a year on the DoD, I mean, can we do one thousandth of that and throw
Yeah,
that at aside? There has to be, and I'm not. This isn't. You mean this is in agreement with you? We have to have something to where you can get, and you might never come out, but there has to be something. There has to be something.
you shared a personal anecdote. I'll share one of my own. I had a
Yeah.
brother who was severely mentally ill. He was a paranoid schizophrenic from the time he was 17 uh, throughout his life, but he was hospitalized off and on and for prolonged periods of time for about 25 years. Um, and the hospitals would let him out when he seemed to be relatively stable, and then he would relapse into hallucinations and really bizarre behaviors. You can't keep people like that at home. I have a tremendous compassion for individuals who have to deal with these people and their families because the hospitals won't keep them now for more than 48, 72 hours.
Sure.
Uh, they can't stay at home. They can't function in society. There needs to be a place where they can receive some sort of care and be, again, placed out of society until they're able to reenter it. And so the mindset, this idealistic mindset that somehow it's cruel to institutionalize people. No, it's not cruel. It's cruel to the families who have to deal with it, and ultimately it's cruel for those individuals who are just wandering around, half out of their mind, doing God knows what. They don't belong out on the streets.
No. And that's, thank you for sharing that. No, I agree with you entirely. Like there has to be somewhere that they can go. And it's, I mean, I look at, so I lost my brother in April 2014, and I went completely off the deep end. I gained like 70 pounds. I was on clonazepam. I was smoking pot. I was drinking. I was just going nowhere fast. And I moved home with my parents in August 2016, and I stayed at home for a little under 5 years. And luckily, I have two loving parents, still married, and they took me right in. And, even though I was 25, 26, 27, 28, I was like the stay-at-home bum, and I saw a therapist weekly for 5 years. That wasn't cheap. And I had a warm bed and food and water, and I'd get better for months at a time, and then I'd kind of collapse and I'd get bad. Mom and dad were there for me every step of the way, and through the grace of God that I'm here. I've been doing the podcast for almost 6 years, and it's kind of opened my life up and just staying down the middle road. If I did not have that, I have no doubt in my mind I would be dead. And I don't mean
Mhm.
that in a hyperbolic way. I mean, I know that the rate I was going, luckily I had mom and dad to where things would get bad. I could quote unquote crash and burn and have like a tough week. And, okay, we go to the therapist. And if I didn't have that, I have no doubt in my mind I would have either tried to fill the patches with drugs. I'm anxious, so I need to be on heroin, or I'm depressed, so I need to smoke meth. Those are two drugs I've never done, but that's where I was going. And I
Yeah.
have no doubt in my mind it would have eventually led to suicide intentionally or unintentionally. There's no doubt in my mind because I was so bad for 5 years. And I'm not, I was a clean cut college student. I mean, straight A's, got into med school, like, and it took me down that far. I've
Yeah.
no doubt in my mind I'd be dead. So with you, I'm very, I'm very compassionate towards it. Like we do have to. There's the New Testament. We do have to take care of them. And I don't mean that in some socialist BS of no, but there has to be somewhere to go.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And you were lucky enough to obviously still be at some level reasonably functional, not a danger to others, not a danger to yourself, and probably not hallucinating most of the time. So you had two loving parents who were willing to care for you at home, and I think that's great.
Hmm.
But there are people who aren't
Don't have
even
that.
that good. No. And they need to go somewhere. And they need to go someplace where, it's clean and the people there are caring and compassionate. It's not supposed to be a prison. I mean, there are abuses that did take place in these mental hospitals, particularly the state hospitals. But, that's just the nature of
That's human
institutions.
nature. That'll
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, but again, I think the issue is, and possibly the reason we're both here today, having a meeting of the minds on this podcast is, I think we've both, based on your story and my own, had some taste of unpleasant realities, you know, and that can shake your world in a way that brings you back into a pragmatic sort of reality. I think what you're seeing from many people on the left is that, they've never had those hardships. Life
Mhm.
has been really soft for them. They've been told that everything they do is fine and there's been no culpability or responsibility for a lot of their actions. And so they can fantasize about, how things, ought to be. They don't have to deal with how things really are. And it's a big issue. It's a big issue. The parenting, I think, has become atrocious in the last, 30, 40 years, in part based on the writings of Dr. Spock, who was also a leftist and a socialist. And he gave the instructions for a whole generation of parents for how to basically enable their children to be spoiled rotten. Uh, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a whole generation of narcissism, malignant narcissism, in many ways. And if you understand the mental health field, you understand that narcissism is always associated with some degree of sociopathy. And the more narcissistically impaired you are, the more sociopathic you are. And so that's, I think, what you're seeing. You're seeing young sociopaths out there like shooting people because, why not? It's just a game, you know?
And I think, and we got to wrap it up. And I'd love to have you back on. I really, I legitimately enjoyed that. But I just, in addition to what you're saying, is like I think we've all had, depression and anxiety. I mean, hell, I do this podcast. I'm anxious every day, it's not a mystery. I'm like, well, I'm building my own thing. There's, no paycheck is ever guaranteed. I'm like, yeah, this is an anxiety inducing endeavor. Like,
Sure.
I get that, right? Um, there's depression, and sometimes I feel depressed. I'm like, well, it's a week after Christmas. I've eaten my body weight in calories every day. Hey, you should probably get that, like, hey, you go to the gym kind of feeling. There are those, and then there are straight up dissociations from reality, and
Yeah.
I've experienced them, and those people they need help, and I think that's ultimately where it comes down to is you have to protect society, and these people also need help.
Yeah.
I think that's that's exactly what it needs to be. Um, Dr. Kradin, I'd love to have you on again sometime, man. That was awesome.
Yeah. I'd be happy to do it. Where are you located?
I'm in Portland, Maine.
You're in Maine. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in New Hampshire now.
Oh, really? I was born in New Hampshire.
Yeah. I'm in
Born.
Amherst, New Hampshire. It's a little
Oh,
south of Manchester.
I was born in Port, or not Port, I was born in Portsmouth. Then we moved around a lot as a kid, Arkansas, New Hampshire, Maine, Georgia, Maryland. But yeah, no, I'm up in Portland, Maine now, and it's absolutely, as you know, it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, except the politics up there in Portland aren't great.
Luckily, I'm high enough up in this building that I don't have to interact with it. So it's I have the view of Mount Washington, so I get my little New Hampshire, and I'm high enough up in a brick building with locked doors that I can kind of ignore that.
That's
But
great. Yeah, no,
yeah,
I lived in Massachusetts for many years, and I finally I couldn't take it anymore. I said
yeah,
I can't live here. You know, I would go into I lived in Concord, Mass. You know, where the
yeah.
Revolutionary War, and I go into the bookstore there, and there would be the people in the bookstore and the people behind the counter would be talking about Trump and laughing and you know, I would say to them, I said, did it ever even enter your mind? And the same was true at Harvard, where I was. So did it ever even enter your mind that there were people who had a different take on this, you know, that they didn't really want to listen to this, you know?
It's
It didn't even enter their mind, you know? It just doesn't everybody think this way?
yeah. I remember one time I was at CVS and I had a shirt. There's a doctor I've had on here forever, Dr. Soloway. He's a rheumatologist, and
Mhm.
he happened to write a book, and he happened to, I think, temporarily was part of the first Trump administration for like I don't know 3 weeks, like 10 years
Mhm.
ago.
Mhm.
And he sent me the shirt. It's just it's a workout shirt, so and it's got his face and it's got his book, and in tiny little letters on a book that is already only a tiny little part of the back, it says like basically like credentials like served in the Trump administration. There was some woman behind me at the line in CVS. I didn't even realize she was talking to me. She was like, excuse me, this Nazi fucker probably. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm like, this poor woman's crazy because there are a lot of crazy people. And I didn't realize until after a couple minutes, I was like, she's looking at the thumbnail wide word
Yeah,
Trump on my left shoulder blade. And
yeah,
I was like, oh, and I like kind of turned around, almost like, oh, it's a, and she was just glaring at me, and I turned and looked at the pharmacist, and she mouthed like, "I'm sorry," and I was like, what the hell was that?
yeah.
It's a word, Trump. It's a shirt about a book by a rheumatologist. What are you talking about? Yeah, it's
One of the things that really amazes me, though, you know, when I was growing up, at least, you know, the people who were conservative, I always thought were rather tough. You know, I thought they were rather tough people. I didn't think they would put up with this nonsense.
yeah.
And it's amazing to me to see how intimidated, you know, many of them are.
It's you can't give him an inch. That's why my podcast was banned from YouTube for 4 years and still banned
Uh,
from iTunes. Is you can't give him an inch, and I'm with you. You gotta stand your ground. Um, Dr. Cradin, we gotta wrap this up. I will send it
okay.
to you. I'm absolutely gonna schedule you again. I'd love to have you back on. I really appreciated this conversation.
Love to do it. Be good.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, guys.